When the English first settled at Jamestown in 1607, they arrived dreaming of gold, silver, and instant wealth. What they found instead was starvation, disease, and a fragile settlement that barely survived its earliest years. By the time the colony reached the 1610s, it was still struggling to find any stable economic foundation. Everything changed with one plant: tobacco. This cash crop didn't just reshape the colony, it reshaped the entire trajectory of North America. Before the English ever set foot in Virginia, indigenous communities had been growing different varieties of tobacco for ceremonial and cultural purposes. The English, however, were looking for something else, a product that could be sold back in Europe. Early attempts to cultivate the local tobacco species failed to excite European consumers. Its strong, harsh flavor didn't match the sweeter tobacco that Spanish colonies were producing and exporting with great success. That's where John Rolfe enters the picture. Rolfe, who would later marry Pocahontas, arrived in Virginia in 1610. He was determined to experiment with tobacco growing and decided to try a Caribbean variety known as Nicotiana tabacum. This type was milder, more aromatic, and already popular in European markets. Rolfe planted seeds he had acquired, possibly smuggled from Spanish-controlled regions. The gamble paid off. By 1612, Rolfe successfully produced a crop that matched European tastes, and by 1613, the first barrels of Virginia-grown tobacco were shipped across the Atlantic. The impact was immediate and transformative. What had been a colony on the verge of collapse suddenly had an export capable of turning a profit. Demand in England surged rapidly, and tobacco went from a risky experiment to the backbone of the entire Virginian economy. Settlers who once struggled to survive now saw opportunities to claim land, grow crops, and build wealth. Tobacco wasn't just a product, it became the foundation of a new economic system. But this success carried major consequences. Growing tobacco required large tracts of land and a tremendous amount of labor. As tobacco fields expanded, colonists pushed farther into indigenous territories, creating new tensions and conflicts with Powhatan communities who saw their lands and resources shrinking. The growth of tobacco also accelerated the demand for labor. Initially, most of the work was done by indentured servants, Europeans who agreed to labor for several years in exchange for passage to the New World. But as the industry expanded and the supply of willing servants declined, plantation owners turned increasingly to enslaved Africans. By the late 1600s, tobacco farming had become inseparable from the development of slavery in the English colonies. The introduction of African labor wasn't sudden, but it grew steadily as tobacco profits climbed and plantation systems took shape. Over time, laws hardened racial divisions and created hereditary slavery, changes that would define American society for centuries. Tobacco didn't just shape the economy, it shaped settlement patterns. Small, clustered towns were replaced by scattered plantations stretched along rivers where ships could load tobacco directly for export. This river-based plantation system created an elite planter class whose wealth and political influence became central to colonial leadership. The Virginia House of Burgesses, the first representative assembly in English America, was dominated by these tobacco planters. By the end of the 17th century, tobacco had transformed Virginia from an unstable experiment into a thriving, profitable colony. The smell of tobacco hung in warehouses, ships and ports, and barrels of the crop became the currency of colonial life. In the end, the phrase "tobacco saved the colony" is true, but only part of the truth. Tobacco did much more than save Jamestown. It set in motion economic patterns and cultural changes that would influence the future United States for generations.